Thank you. Welcome, Wolverines. Hello, my name is Jen. I'm responsible for keeping time and answering any questions from competitors or the judges for the final round. There have been no decision documents prepared for this round, so the round will begin once I finish reading the instructions. When the round begins, teams will have 10 minutes to present their policy recommendations to the panel of judges. When there are 5 minutes remaining, I will hold up this green sign. When there is 1 minute remaining, I will hold up this yellow sign. And if I hold up the stop sign and you are still speaking, please do finish your sentence and no run-on sentences. Thank you. At the conclusion of the team's presentation, judges will then have 10 minutes to ask direct questions of the team regarding their policy recommendations. I will again hold up the 5-minute, 1-minute, and stop sign. After the Q&A session has concluded, there are 10 minutes scheduled for the judges to provide feedback to the team. The team is not permitted to ask questions during this time. Following the conclusion of the feedback session, the judge will remain seated to evaluate and score teams for 5 minutes. After this round is complete, a 5-minute break is scheduled before the start of the next team's briefing. Observers, please remember to be quiet and that the microphones are still on, okay? And please no getting up or talking during the team's presentation. Team, judges, do you have any questions? Excellent. I will begin my 10-minute timer when you start speaking.
Good morning, members of the National Security Council. My name is Hope Fager, and I am joined by Cooper Hopkin, Nicholas Bradley, and Camden Mead. We are the Wolverine Cybersecurity Task Force, and we will be briefing another update to the Trax cyber incident. The bottom line up front is that outrage from the US public and from the Mexican government has grown as a result of several factors, including a leak of classified FBI documents and information, and improper arrest of Claudia Cruz Rivera, the leader of La Hermandad cartel. This situation is going to require communication with the Mexican government and with the public, investigation into the various processes used, and mitigation of further escalation to this situation. A number of US teenagers participating in trafficking over the US border were arrested, and an anonymous source, supposedly from an FBI field office, revealed that the phones that were confiscated from them contained NICS spyware, which was manufactured by Greek company Providence. Another classified FBI document was leaked to the messaging app known as Discord, revealing that the FBI has considered purchasing this spyware. This has caused a large amount of outrage from the American public, even going so far as to call the American government hypocritical and to demand accountability from governmental leaders. The Mexican government is also outraged over the arrest of Claudia Cruz Rivera, which they claim was executed in a manner that was not consistent with past Mexico-US joint law enforcement operations. In order to curtail this situation and prevent it from escalating any further, it is imperative that we address both the public concerns and the concerns of the Mexican government in ways that are productive and helpful in building relationships back where they have been broken.
We believe that we should be taking a three-pronged approach to this situation. First, we need significantly better communication with the Mexican government. We have already strained our relations with Mexico in the past, and this is making it all the much worse. We also need to investigate any internal leaks in the FBI and the internal use and potential misuse of the NICS software, and mitigate any fallout from these leaks and the misuse of this spyware. communication with Mexico is going to be vital. We need to ensure them that due process is being followed, especially with concerns to Executive Order 14093, which states that we will not be using spyware that is commercially available unless it follows certain guidelines. And that one of those guidelines is the reporting of the use of this commercial software. In addition, we need to talk to Mexico discussing the detention of Claudia Cruz Rivera. They have said that they believe that the detention, that we did not communicate clearly with them, and they are claiming that we detained her in a way that was not proper. We also need to work with the FBI attaché to work with our Mexican counterparts to discuss this detention and include the Mexican government and these attaché counterparts as much as possible.
Additionally, there are several steps we should take to continue our investigation both into the cartel as well as to potential internal abuse of power. For this, we recommend that the FBI and the DNI search throughout the U.S. government agencies to discover where or if the software is being used. We also recommend that the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility be utilized to identify any potential internal threats, since we have seen an increase with the leakage of data, particularly from the FBI. We also recommend that the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community conduct an internal investigation of NICS software, particularly when it pertains to use of NICS against U.S. citizens, and even more so against minors within the U.S. We also recommend continuing our investigation of the La Hermandad cartel. This includes utilizing a task force that we have previously established, which is led by the FBI, and also composed of the DHS, NSA, DEA, Customs and Border Patrol, and CIA. This task force will continue investigations of the identities and operations of U.S. citizens that may be affiliated with the cartel. The initial access broker, which could have let the cartel gain access to Trax data. The social media accounts that have been used to recruit U.S. citizens to work with the cartel, and also to conduct various digital forensics investigations.
Finally, moving on to our last policy priority, mitigate the impacts of both the broader border crisis and the leakage of classified data. First and foremost, as my counterpart said, collaboration with Mexico is absolutely critical. That's why we recommend collaborating with Mexico to ensure that they have a backup to the track system while patches are developed. In order to do this, we recommend that CISA, FEMA, and the Southwest Border Communications Working Group use an existing emergency communications platform in order to provide communication to the Mexican National Guard. Though, of course, this is also a PR problem, it's still a logistical problem at the border. Trax is still compromised, the Mexican National Guard still has many vulnerabilities within their patrols, and we need to patch that as soon as possible. Within this line of thinking, we also recommend that the United States Emergency Readiness Team and original developers, both American and Mexican, work in collaboration with private companies such as Mandia to develop a patch to this immediately. Now that the jig is up, for lack of a better words, with the vulnerability in the track system, we need to work with our Mexican counterparts in order to collaborate with this. This is no longer a unilateral action. We need to avoid the perception of that in any way we can. We also recommend that the President of the United States work with various state governors to declare states of emergency as deemed necessary and employ the National Guard under Title 32 of the U.S. Code. This would allow the President to both bankroll National Guard operations, all while still collaborating with Customs and Border Patrol agents and protecting migrant communities that are still vulnerable and still need to be protected. We still have information that hate crimes are on the rise in El Paso, and thus we recommend that the Department of Justice collaborate with local police departments and prosecutors in order to ensure that the prosecution of federal hate crimes be implemented as effectively as possible. Just a small clarification, we aren't advocating for the Department of Justice to necessarily prosecute these cases directly, but we do want to make a collaborative space where states feel like their resources are both valued and utilized. Finally, we recommend that the White House release 2 public statements regarding 2 different situations. Number one, the use of spyware, specific mitigation processes that the United States uses in order to protect constitutional rights, and accountability mechanisms in place when illegal usage of spyware is determined. To be clear, this is not a confession of liability in this case. We are just releasing a statement regarding existing American policy towards spyware and specific ways that we have mechanisms in place to protect against the misuse of this. As my counterpart Nicholas said, we still don't have the full picture of this breach, and we need to understand how, what department, and under what authority NICS, if at all, was exfiltrated by American counterparts onto these phones. Finally, we also recommend that the White House release a second statement addressing the rise of trafficking within the southern border. We have information from our latest intel drop that there's been an 80% rise in the trafficking of fentanyl, which has inevitably led to additional deaths and seizures by Customs and Border Patrol.
1 minute.
This is unacceptable and it needs to be immediately mitigated. To do this, we recommend that the White House not only outline all the policy recommendations that we have stated earlier, but also recommend that the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services declare fentanyl usage a public health emergency under U.S. Code 42, which gives the Secretary additional powers and authorities. Finally, in conclusion, we recommend that the United States initiate 2 social media campaigns. The first, to address war cartel propaganda that is still coming out from the La Hermana cartel, and the second, raising awareness of the dangers of opioid use and fentanyl trafficking. This will specifically be led by the White House Office of National Drug Policy, the Department of Health and Human Services, the CDC, and the Nonprofit Ad Council. That's our brief, and we are now open for questions.
1 second remaining too. Awesome. Judges, over to you for questions.
Yeah, I'll take the first question. Hold on. So you mentioned that the arrest. Turn the microphone on.
You mentioned that the recent arrests were not done in accordance with U.S.-Mexican policy and previous activities. Is this true, and do we care?
Unfortunately, if nothing else due to optics, we have to care. Right now, we don't know for sure if this arrest was unilateral, if it followed proper channels. That is something we have to investigate, and we need to make sure Mexico knows we are investigating that. In addition, we need to collaborate with Mexico and try to understand why they think that this arrest was improper.
Quick follow-up. Why do we need to cooperate with Mexico?
This is a border security issue, and quite frankly, the track system is not used by Customs and Border Patrol, which is a major vulnerability that is allowing trafficking into the United States. So if we refuse to collaborate with Mexico on every circumstance, they're most likely not going to work with us when it comes to patching tracks, which means that there's a large security vulnerability in our southern border that is generally unacceptable. So this needs to be a bilateral approach.
Just to add on to that, the U.S. and Mexico have been allies for a very, very long time. And throughout this entire crisis, we have been trying to work with the Mexican government. We are not on the best relations at the moment for many reasons, including their perception of the Claudia Cruz arrest, whether or not that perception is completely factual. So it is important that we repair these relationships because, like my colleague has said, we're working together on this. This is a problem that we're both facing. Mexico has also expressed that they are not super happy with the way that the migrant crisis and the fentanyl crisis is affecting them as a country as well. So this is a common problem, and there's no reason not to work with them if they're willing to work with us.
I'd like to address the issue of timing with respect to Mexico. If it's our initiative to say that we need to improve communications, Mexico's in the midst of a presidential election campaign. It's possible, President AMLO is usually referred to succeed himself. And so, to some extent, do you think this is posturing by his political party to try and grow support for his candidate in the election? And if we procrastinate and buy a little time in this, do you think we would get a better level of cooperation or not? Or should we do it immediately now?
So to kind of answer the twofold part of your question, we definitely do agree that this is political posturing because we are also in election season and a lot of the info that we've been getting is inherently political. So we are, of course, involved in political posturing as well. And though I definitely understand that those conversations need to be had in the geopolitical context, this might be on the scope of our specific committee. So that's a Department of State issue, and we're more focused on mitigating the direct impacts rather than ensuring long-term political stability in Mexico.
And to add on to that, we have an immediate issue which is causing a huge increase in fentanyl trafficking into the United States. So it may be possible that we could get some kind of better deal by waiting a year or several months. But if we want to prevent the deaths that we're seeing right now in the public outcry, we want to very publicly show that we are committed to our allies and that we are committed to keeping people safe.
In addition to that, I feel that it is incredibly important to note that this is a humanitarian crisis. This isn't just politics, these are human lives. If communication with Mexico, regardless of political posturing or political relations, helps save lives, I feel that we should be prioritizing that.
You made a very definitive statement, which is to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Which is to investigate the FBI. And then also further on, you mentioned that within the FBI could do a few things. So my question is, thank you. My question is, do you have evidence that there was impropriety in the FBI? The second question would be, and if that's the case, is it, what are the options do we have for the second recommendation, which is to kick off? I can't remember what it is you recommend the FBI do. But the first question is, do you have evidence of improprieties?
So at this particular moment in time, we do have multiple news sources stating that they have a source at the FBI, specifically from an FBI field office, that gave them this information. So at least we are of the opinion that that is at least enough evidence for an investigation, because that is a very serious threat to information security and to national security in general. So that is something that should be looked into. However, when it comes to the work of the FBI in these investigative efforts, quite honestly, the expertise of the FBI legal attaché in Mexico and what they know of the situation and the players involved is to some extent too valuable to take off of that force. So if we want to start by investigating that specific legal attaché and kind of clear them or catch any perpetrators amongst them as soon as possible, then we can definitely make that a priority. But their expertise in the field makes it so that taking them off of that task force is probably not the smartest decision.
It's also worth noting that we're recommending that the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility be the one who investigates the FBI. So this is something that the FBI can handle internally, and if need be, the DNI can step in for additional assistance.
In addition to that, in the same way that on a local level, internal affairs investigations can't stop the function of law enforcement, we can't stop the function of the FBI because there is an internal investigation going on.
So this is a very complex scenario, and I appreciate that, but what of the issues that you've laid out is the most important from a national security perspective that we should be paying attention to?
So I believe that the broader tracks compromise is probably the #1 priority, as that's leading to more immediate casualties, for lack of a better word, under the policy. But I believe it's a multidisciplinary problem that requires collaboration with Mexico, and that's why we believe that this kind of political fallout with Mexico is hampering efforts to stop a massive compromise of a very secure system. So,
And when you look at your policy recommendations, which is the most significant that will, cause both the most action from my fellow members of the National Security Council here, and also will likely get the president's attention if it's implemented?
I would say the top two are working the state governors to declare states of emergency as deemed necessary and deploying the National Guard under Title 32. This allows the United States to send National Guardsmen to the border in law enforcement capabilities without violating the Posse Comitatus Act, so they can help Border Patrol secure the border. And as a multifaceted approach, we're also declaring fentanyl trafficking as a national health emergency and deploying the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps to the border that is going to help not only prevent but educate these border communities in fentanyl overdoses. So I would say those two. Again, I don't think there's a single policy option that we wouldn't recommend or we wouldn't have given it to you, but I would say those two.
I love the quick question. Because in the private sector, you mentioned Mandiant specifically in terms of the response. Why Mandiant?
Yeah, so I guess I gave it as more of an example. I believe CISA is probably the most valuable person to determine what companies are best suited for it. So I didn't necessarily mean that we are ordering Mandiant to the border, but I do think
I think you got it, because practically in the feedback, I would replace Mandiant with system. Yes, go ahead. Anyone else?
One other quick question. So you mentioned at the outset that there was a large amount of outrage. Can you just describe how the metric you're using for the large amount of outrage?
There are several metrics. I think the most important one right now is the violence that is happening in El Paso. Several migrant communities and people of Latin American descent have been attacked, verbally harassed, or threatened. And I feel like that's a very clear indicator of public unrest.
All right, and with that, we are at time. Right into feedback, judges, we have 10 minutes.
I'm holding the mic, so I'll start. First of all, a great job dealing with all of the myriad of issues here. And I think, prioritizing at the end, you got the question what that looks like from a national security standpoint, but when you gave your presentation, it was hard to understand where those things ranked. So think about that when you're communicating. A couple other things that I'd highlight, try to be a little more specific, right? If we're going to mitigate, how are we going to mitigate? What are we mitigating? If we're doing better comms, what does better comms look like? Why are we doing that? It's about the trade-offs. Whenever you're presenting policy options, or especially talking to the National Security Council, you're going to talk to them about what the benefits are of what you're proposing and what possible risks perhaps could be. Because otherwise you're just throwing out ideas, and it's hard for folks to make the decision about what we're going to implement and what we're not in the larger context that those trade-offs aren't discussed.
Okay, so I think the main points that you hit, and I think you did very effectively, represented by the word outrage, and that was the main issue, and also the issue that people are dying because of fentanyl overdoses. So those two things really stood out to me from your presentation. I think you hit the most critical parts where you really wanted to. In talking about the possible misuse of spyware, you went so far as to use the words abuse of power, and I just want to ask if that you really wanted to go with that. We'll move on from that. You said the other point you made, which I thought was really good, was that we kind of got caught doing things the way we wanted to do them, and this is no longer a unilateral scenario. We really, if we want anything to get better from here on out, we have to fix what we just broke. And then finally, the suggestion of providing the backup to tracks. I'm really wondering if at this point whether Mexico's going to use anything that we want to lend to them, but that's another one.
So I came on my feedback with round 3 is really hard. So you did a really good job with not a lot of time to get your heads around this scenario. I also thought the analysis in terms of what are the things that we care about was spot on. I do agree with Natasha that I would have started with that and said, here's the, as National Security Council, here's the thing we care about for national security, here's what we're doing about it, and then you can deal with the rest. You might have guessed from my question about like, hey, what are the big impact issues here? Those are really big. Close the border and, call up the National Guard. It's gonna have, that will be front page news for a week everywhere. I think you really need to, if I were giving this presentation and that was my recommendation, I would have spent the entire time just talking about those 2 things. Forget the rest, because all of the rest are 2% of the amount of resources, attention, political capital, anything else that you're going to need to spend. I also thought, your response to Eric's question on is this posturing from the Mexican government, which I think probably it is, was good, but then, your analysis slipped back to, but we need to spend a lot of time repairing this relationship, but maybe the relationship isn't as damaged as the posturing would lead you to believe. So I would just keep that in mind. The last point I'll make is the counterintelligence piece, really important. And I'm glad you raised that as something in terms of like, hey, when you see top secret information on a Discord channel, like that is a national security concern. And it's good to see that surfaced because it's easy to kind of get down the rabbit hole of what exactly the operational happenings are, but that would certainly have a lot of folks' attention at the White House. So very good job, guys.
Strong start. I loved it. Gave me some a working framework on how to interpret the information. I did feel as though you went on and kind of got diluted a little bit. So strong start, and I'm like, okay, what are we trying to do now? And actually, I noticed that your last point was actually your first point. Should have been your first point, which is tracks. So I caught that. But either way, super strong start. A little diluted in the middle, but I think you did a great job answering the questions as well.
I'd like to echo my colleagues' remarks about a very well organized, polished, balanced presentation. Some of these questions were difficult, and you guys didn't flinch, and that's a good sign that you're confident in what you're recommending and that you know what you're talking about and you've been well prepared. So that's all to the good. One thing I think I would have worked in is that we have a non-state, at least one, non-state actor in this mix, and that's the W0LV3R1NES cartel. They're not going to take it easy, particularly if we turn up the heat. And I would have liked to have seen a few more things about how we could get ahead of those types of problems, what we anticipate their actions might be, and what we can do with the Mexican government in a situation or a scenario where things get worse.
So I got a couple more points, since we got bonus time here. So one of them is the public statements, right, from the White House, and particularly the first one on the spyware. And I think you hit the concern very correctly, which is like, hey, we're not admitting liability, and then you're not issuing the statement, right? Like, I think you exactly identified the concern of if we're putting out a statement about spyware that no one knows if it's FBI or not, and we don't know, there's no information that you all have from the scenario that says it was actually the FBI that put it there. There are other questions if someone else put it there, and then it's like, well, then under 1493, should we be, buying the spyware? Lots of questions there, but we don't have any evidence to say it was the FBI. And putting out a statement that says, hey, we're really good at making sure that foreign commercial spyware is very carefully regulated internally is like, yeah, you're admitting guilt. Like, we're not gonna do that as a policy thing. And again, I thought it was very astute of you to point that out. But I think to the earlier points about presenting trade-offs, that would have been a good one to maybe present a little more, because you kind of just hand waved over the, hey, don't worry about, like the fact that this might be seen as admitting that we put this byway there. The other point in my last question, right, was on the metrics for outrage. I think from my perspective, right, sitting at the White House today, if I saw this level of reporting, I would not say, oh my goodness, everyone is outraged. And that might be different for political folks in the West Wing, for instance. Maybe they have a different perspective on that. But from the National Security Council perspective, right, and from where I sit, right, at the Office of National Cyber Director, this is not enough. Some vague CNN article that's like, hey, there's spyware here, and could it be from the FBI? I don't know. That's not really a level of outrage. And then I think the other is like, well, what's the delta? If you're talking about the border of fentanyl, it's like, okay, yeah, that's actually got a lot of political valence to it. But how much is this in the general level of concern about the border, immigration, drug trafficking, etc.? How much is this blipped up? Is this 100% increase? Okay, I'm very interested now, sitting in the White House. But I don't know if there's anything in the scenario that would put me there.
Yeah, my other hard question for you was gonna be, who is outraged and do we care, right? Because, right, it's easy to read a blog post and say people are outraged, but this is a PhD student, how many people actually read that person's blog, right? And, that's where we are, right? And also, as you're thinking about that in kind of a similar way, confirming or not confirming in a national security meeting is important, right? You said you had a reported top secret documents leaked. There's disinformation all over the place. And so it's important to think about, was this actually top secret information? Was it accurate? Is there disinformation included in that leak? Is there things that are not accurate? How are we going to respond to that? How do we consider that information? So take it in context and think through, what do we actually need to confirm versus what do we know for sure?